Hello, sweet readers and great little learners. It's Miss Stark here, and I'm here today to bring you a new story. If you look over my shoulder, you will see a beautiful little creek. You can almost hear the little creek if we're very quiet. In that creek, we know there are probably lots of little insects, probably some little fish, not very big fish, little fish, and probably a few snails, and maybe something else, perhaps an amphibian or two or three. And I know what you're thinking. What is an amphibian? It's a little frog. Those of you that weren't quite sure, that's what we're going to read about today. We're going to read about a frog and a toad. So let's go over to the table that's up here and see if we can find a story waiting for us. Now I'm outside, as you can see, so we may hear some outdoor sounds. You can see a sky above us, see trees and bushes, and lots of little flowers are coming up. And I like reading outside. Outside is a great place to read a story. So here we go. We're going up here. We're going up on some steps. We're sitting up there, and would you just look behind my shoulder and look who I see? It's a frog. It's a frog, and he's waiting for us because he has the story all ready for us. The story about Frog and Toad. Let's get him and the book. Here we go. Yep, there's Frog. Now, when you look at him, you'll notice he has clothes on, a shirt, pants. So we know he is fiction because he is not dressed like a real frog. A little frog would not really have on clothes at all. So he's fiction. And the story that we're going to read today is also fiction because the characters in that story also are wearing clothes. But before we begin to read, we have to get familiar with our new vocabulary words. So here we go. Listen carefully. And when I read the word, if you would please read it yourself after me from your side of the camera. Here we go. I'm going to point to them. And the first word is second. Everybody say second on your side. Ball, across, head, heard, large, cried, and should. And we know we've seen that word before in other forms. We saw the word would and could. And we know that when we replace that C and the W in would and could, we have the word should. So we get to read it today in our story. All right, now we have some words over here, the same ones in a sentence form to help us make sure we understand the word meaning. So let's go to the first one, number one. Second. Everybody say second on your side. The boy is trying to tie his second sneaker. Number two, ball. She practiced until she could hit the ball well. Very good, everybody. All right, let's go over here to number three. Look at the picture. Look at the word. Here we go. Across. The runners dashed across the finish line. Good job, everybody. Number four, head. He hit the ball with his head to make a goal. And I can just see some of you are probably nodding your heads right now because you know if you hit a ball with your head, you must be playing soccer. Number five, heard. Now, when you look at the word heard and you look at the word head, my goodness, they look almost the same. You're looking closely and you see what makes them different. The word heard has an R and it completely changes the way you say it. Heard. The children heard clapping at the end. Thank you for following along. The next one, number six, large. It was not too hard to ride up the large hill. Good job, everybody. Let's go down to the bottom. Number seven, cried. We can do it, cried the team. Now, that doesn't mean that they're crying with tears. It's more of a cry with a loud voice and an exclamation all together. They cried it out loud and clear. And then number 8, there it is, our word shh. should. The teacher said that she should try again. Great picture. All right, it is now time to get ready to read our story. Now, one of the reasons I chose to read this outside is because, once again, we're thinking about the weather. And we know that the weather can cause problems, and it can also be good, too. Now, weather can also come in the form of storms. And storms can cause homes to be damaged. Sometimes you can get too much rain, and that can cause floods. But weather can also be very good and help us, because rain helps crops to grow. Wind is very helpful because this is why we're reading this story. Wind helps kites fly. Good job, everybody. I know you were thinking that. So we're going to find out in this story if the wind helps Frog and Toad in our story. Let's look at the title. Do you see it? It's called The Kite. And now you're seeing the connection between the kite and the reason for the wind as part of our subject today. The Kite is written by Arnold Lobel, and it's from the story Days with Frog and Toad, which is actually a chapter book. So we've kind of picked out one little chapter, and that's the one we're going to read today. Now, this story definitely is fiction, just like we talked about with our little frog guy here, but it's also a different kind of fiction story. It's not realistic. Realistic means it could happen, but no, not this story. This is a fantasy story. It could never really happen. Fantasies are very fun to read, and they're things that could not really happen, and sometimes you'll see animals who talk and act like humans. I know you'll look for those things as we read this story. Here we go. Let's think about those characters, Frog and Toad. The Kite. Frog and Toad went out to fly a kite. They went to a large meadow where the wind was strong. "Our kite will fly up and up and up," said Frog. "It will fly all the way up to the top of the sky." "Toad," said Frog, "I will hold the ball of string. You hold the kite and run." It sounds like they have a plan. Plans are good. Let's see what happens next. Oh, look at the picture. I see some characters that we didn't even really expect. We have some surprise characters. Let's see what kind of characters they are. Toad ran across the meadow. He ran as fast as his short legs could carry him. The kite went up in the air. It fell to the ground with a bump. Toad, here's this word, heard laughter. 3 robins were sitting in a bush. "That kite will not fly," said the robins. "You may as well give up." Toad ran back to Frog. "Frog," said Toad, "this kite will not fly. I give up." Did you notice something there? Toad was influenced by the robins. The robins told him that he would not be able to fly the kite and he should give up. And that's what he's trying to do. I wonder what Frog will tell Toad. Here we go. Let's find out what happens with this new problem. "We must make a second try," said Frog. "Wave the kite over your head. Perhaps that will make it fly." Toad ran back across the meadow. He waved the kite over his head. So he's trying. I like that. I like he's trying. Here we go. The kite went up in the air and then fell down with a thud. "What a joke," said the robins. "That kite will never get off the ground." And there they are looking at Toad. My goodness, they're not very optimistic, are they? Here we go. Next page. Okay, we're back to Frog and Toad having a conversation. Toad ran back to Frog. "This kite is a joke," he said. "It will never get off the ground." "We have to make a third try," said Frog. "Wave the kite over your head and jump up and down, and perhaps that will make it fly." Oh, more encouraging. Here he goes, and look at him. It looks like he's following directions. Toad ran across the meadow again. He waved the kite over his head. He jumped up and down. The kite went up in the air and crashed down into the grass. Now, I know you're wondering, how is Toad feeling? Think about if you're Toad. You've tried again, and it still won't fly. What do you think is not happening right now? Thinking about the weather. What's not happening? I know you're thinking. Here we go. Now look at those pesky birds. Pesky is a great adjective for them because they look like they're laughing. Let's see what the words say. They'll help us know. That kite is junk, said the robins. Throw it away and go home. Toad ran back to Frog. This kite is junk, he said. I think we should throw it away and go home. There goes that Toad again, being influenced by those pesky robins. He shouldn't give up. Toad, said Frog, we need one more try. Wave the kite over your head, jump up and down, and shout up, kite, up. Toad ran across the meadow. He waved the kite over his head. He jumped up and down, and he shouted. Now I'm going to change my voice because I need to read it loud because everything is in capital letters. Up, kite, up! Here we go. Oh my goodness, let's look at this picture for a moment. Notice the kite. Notice our friend Frog, Toad. And look at the robins. Notice how quiet they look. Let's read and see what it says. The kite flew into the air. It climbed higher and higher. We did it, cried Toad. Yes, said Frog, if a running try did not work, a running and waving try did not work, and a running, waving, and jumping try did not work. I knew that. A running, waving, jumping, and shouting try just had to work. Oh, clap your hands if you are loving this story. I know you are. Here we go. We've got one more page to go. I hope you can, let's look at the picture for just a moment. It makes me think of another story we read recently when we read Ish. They are savoring what they see. They're trying to make it last. Here we go. The robins flew out of the bush, but they could not fly as high as the kite. Frog and Toad sat and watched their kite. It seemed to be flying way up at the top of the sky. Now we can be very excited and clap for the end of that story. That was wonderful. Excellent job. I want you to think about a couple of things as we continue to finish up our story. I know you know who the characters were, Frog and Toad, and then we had those wonderful little characters, the robins, who were a little bit pesky and not very encouraging. Now, the kite was in the story, but was it really a character? It was more of a detail. It was a very important key detail to the story, but it wasn't a character. Now, this setting is the next thing I want you to think about. We've talked about the characters, the setting, and I know you're thinking, I know what the setting is. The setting is where the story takes place. And I know that you know it takes place outside. Did you happen to think, what time of the year did this story seem to be? Well, we see green grass. We see here, I love this. This detail is important. Some of the grass is starting to blow. So we know that March is usually a time for when things like the wind kicks up. I love that. What a wonderful little story. Now, our next thing was not just the setting, but I wanted you to think about the plot. What was the problem in this story? How did they solve it? So the problem, of course, was the kite would not fly. And how did they solve it? Well, they did work together. Frog was the encourager. He encouraged Toad all along the way. And Toad, he was likely to give up, but he probably learned a valuable lesson. Don't give up. Never give up. Always persevere. So that is how that story was solved. All right, I love that story. So now you're probably thinking, what can I do now that this story is over? Well, you can always watch it again and see if there's something else that you didn't catch the first time. But the second thing I want you to think about is maybe getting out a piece of paper, a notebook paper perhaps, and write down something that maybe you had trouble with the first time and you persevered, you did not give up, and you finally accomplished it. One thing that I think about is that some of you boys and girls have told me how you're now riding a bike with two wheels. That probably took some work and practice and not giving up. So if you're riding two wheels, you persevered, and you could write in your journal or on a piece of paper about that experience, about not giving up. If you already know how to ride your bike and there's something else, maybe it's juggling, maybe you could write about that, how you never gave up. Or it could be cooking or sewing or being better at sports. So think of something that you could write about that you've gotten better because you persevered. Thank you for listening to the story. I hope you have a great day. Bye.